On Network Africa today, Rwandans head to the polls to vote on a change in the constitution that would allow President Paul Kagame run a third term in office. The AU is considering sending 5,000 peacekeepers to protect civilians in Burundi. Then our take on spam SMS, which is a thing in Nigeria, but are they necessary? Network Africa begins right now. Welcome to the program. I am Amarachi Ubani. It is decision time in Rwanda today as thousands head to the polls to decide on making a change to the constitution which would allow President Paul Kagame run a third term. Now, if it goes through, then the president will be able to run again in 2017 after his second mandate ends. The president has been quite evasive on whether or not he would run, but he said before that if the people want, then he would be running again. The results, which analysts expect to be yes, is likely to emerge later today. Under the changes, Paul Kagame could seek another 7-year term and 2 5-year terms after that. The United States, a major donor that has praised Kagame for rebuilding the nation since the genocide, said Kagame should resist the lure of power and step down in 2017 to allow a new generation of leaders to come through. The debate about extending presidential terms has swept other African nations. It's triggered violence and instability in Burundi and the Congo Republic, but not in Rwanda. Over in Libya, local militia are reported to have sent back U.S. troops flown to the country to support government troops in the lingering crisis. The troops chose to leave in an effort to avoid conflict. That conflict the country has had 2 rival governments, one based in the main city, Tripoli, and the other about 1,000 kilometers away in the port city of Tobruk. Both governments signed a deal in Morocco yesterday, agreeing to form a national unity government. 20 U.S. Special Forces troops equipped with advanced weaponry landed at an airbase west of the country earlier today. Now, Niger says it has foiled a coup plot against President Mahamadou Issoufou. According to the president, the plotters had tried to use aerial firepower to unseat him. In an address to the nation earlier, he said an investigation has been launched to identify those responsible and possible accomplices. At least 4 senior military officials have been arrested, but no official reason has been given for their detention. President Issoufou was elected in 2011, bringing an end to years of military rule. A country has seen several coups since becoming independent in 1960. Over now to Burundi, where the African Union is proposing to send 5,000 peacekeepers to help protect civilians. If it goes through, then it will be the first time that the AU is invoking a rule to deploy a force without a country's consent. The clause in the AU Charter allows it to intervene in a member state because of grave circumstances, which include war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. The decision comes amid fears that violence could spiral into a civil war and possible ethnic conflict. And diplomatic moves to prevent a civil war in Burundi have recently accelerated, with the UN, the European Union, and East African community fearful of the impact of worsening violence both on the local population and the region. At a special session convened at the U.S. request to discuss the conflict, the UN Human Rights Council resolved to dispatch independent investigators to Burundi to probe the abuses. Joining us now is Dr. Rashid Akinyemi of the Department of Political Science at the University of Lagos to discuss the situation in Burundi. Doctor, thank you for joining us on the program.
Good afternoon, Amarachi.
Good afternoon. Let's get your take on the EU's proposal. Do you think it's coming a bit late?
Yes, I think I'm afraid it's coming late because we have seen signs of this since May. And if nobody has taken action since May and it got to this situation now, it might get worse. So I'm afraid that we've not taken the appropriate action at the right time.
And would Burundi have actually needed an international force? Because this crisis really started in April when President Pierre Nkurunziza announced that he was considering running a third term. So at the crisis that happened in May, would that have been the point where the African Union should have stepped in?
Yes, and actually, already, in April already, there were protests, and one demand announced its short-term intention. So already there should have been a sort of a warning, a collapse signal that we should pay attention to what's happening in Burundi. Now, since May now, we have seen that the court also favored this man, knowing definitely that the society does not want it. So we would have started actually, let's say from May. We know that we should have actually been on alert since May to say that, because we know the history of this country and society, we know what's happening in Rwanda. So it is not new that something can escalate overnight in this Great Lakes region. So therefore, I think there should have been movement since May, latest, in order to have avoided what happened some days ago, killing of people on the street. And I think the African Union should take a very firm step right now in order to avoid another genocide on the African continent.
Doctor, do you think that the African Union's response also depicts, the same attitude with which other neighboring African countries or other African countries are responding to the crisis in Burundi?
You see, and let me tell you something. The African Union, I'm afraid, might be moving like the OAU, because in many African countries, the leaders also, they want to go for a third term. Look at Rwanda now, asking for a third term. So I think, every African country has a smoke, has a skeleton in their cupboard. So that's why most of the leaders, they are not even eager to enforce the African Union to go on and take steps. So I think that African Union now is not like OAU, I want to suppose, and I think the question of non-interference is not acceptable to anybody.
But in a situation like this, do you think the dialogue could play any role in this?
Who? Sudan?
No, I mean in Burundi. Do you think the dialogue could play a role in bringing an end to this crisis?
Well, you see, dialogue, yes, this is diplomacy. Dialogue is an instrument of diplomacy, but at the same time, there should be alert so that the president himself, Burundi, will know that nobody is ready to take any nonsense from him. Dialogue with who? That's the question. And is it with the various ethnic groups or with other leaders of the African Union in order to see that this does not escalate? Because if you look at the constellation of Burundi now, you have the Tutsi, Hutu, in various political, in various power sectors. So it's going to be even bloodier than it was in Rwanda. So dialogue with who? Because I'm sure the present situation now does not call for a peaceful dialogue among the citizens of Burundi.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Doctor, because, if you're asking dialogue with who, because at the end of the day, what solves the problem will be people wanting President Pierre Nkurunziza, a certain people wanting President Pierre Nkurunziza to step down as president. But thank you so much for your thoughts, Dr. Rashid Akinyemi.
Thanks for having me.